G, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you.
I'm really excited that you're here. As I was preparing for this episode and I was sharing with you, you have this really amazing depth of knowledge and skills and experience. And I think if anyone really wants to look you up, they can look you up. But I think that I really want to talk to you about some of the things that you maybe don't normally share in your day-to-day life. You have such a rich career and experience in the business world and have seen so many different types of companies and businesses and worked with leaders and, traveled the world in your entrepreneurial journey. I think that's a full episode on its own. But I almost want to try to get out of you today as we finish off the year and we walk into the next year. I really want to talk about some of the things that perhaps you normally don't talk about. And I guess I'll kind of start with, let's just kind of talk about the current time and then I'll go maybe a little bit farther. But let's start with talking about 2021. Yeah. And I want to know from your experience, what are the things that showed up for you in 2021 that you really took away and learned about you personally? And what are the things that you can take? What are the lessons from that? And what are you going to take into 2022 from those lessons?
Yeah, that's a great question. So much of my identity, at least to myself, is what I do. It's probably the case for a lot of people. And so those are the ones that are most impactful to me, but then they sometimes translate to your personal life because those lessons can be, if you were to bifurcate your life into a couple of quadrants, work, personal, family, friends, I'd probably say where I identify myself that was most impactful started with my professional life in 2021, and then it reverberates through all the other components. I think the lesson that I've learned, at least having been around for a while now, is the adversity component of particularly any business, generally speaking, creates both strength at whatever you're trying to accomplish. It's never easy. It's quite painful. Sometimes you kind of question your own decision-making that got you to the point that you're at. But then having been through a couple of these, I think back to 94, 99, 2001, 2008, and then now, those periods of time were generally short and acute. And so I think the lesson that I learned again, having gone sort of 12 years with really sort of a nice trajectory, was these changes are generally speaking acute, unless you end up in a Great Depression type scenario. It's interesting what the government has done to allow us to have an impact on our daily lives, personal lives, be much more mitigated today than I would say cycles in the past. Mm-hmm. The government itself is trying unprecedented things to prop up what they know could be quite disastrous. I think it's a global response, which is slightly different than some of the challenges of the past, which has allowed for this 2021 to be actually quite muted in a way that, at least as a business person, has its own set of challenges, different set of challenges. And there I see is the bubble scenario, which is, in our work, we're asked to put money to work. And there's no better lesson in life than to put money to work when you create basis at the right price, because your mistakes have a lot of room if you've created basis at the right price, whether it's an operating mistake, a decision, an acquisition,
sure,
financing. Hard to lose your basis if you create it at the right price. Right now, both things that we sell and things we recycle back into, my personal view is we're creating basis at very, very high pricing. And so what you don't want to do is finance yourself in a way that assumes that equity that you put in is financeable to the levels that you put on if you finance that type of investment. And so I think that's the first lesson is, in these types of cycles, let's make sure our downside is protected first before we look at what the potential upside is in any investment that we're making. That's right. Kind of lesson one. Two is, staying out of the game versus participating, right? And so you can lose, and many people have, sort of the last 50, 60 percentage points in the markets over the last 2 years, having stayed out of the game, which I would have told you, and I personally had sort of taken risk off. Well, pre-crisis, right? Because I thought valuations were getting to the point where, hey, I probably want to recycle rather than ride the wave. And
Correct.
in some ways, COVID has actually accelerated asset prices in a way that, is not, I wouldn't say unprecedented. We've seen this sort of in the late 80s, and then again in 2000. And then there are distinct differences in each of those cycles that is unique to those cycles relative to where we are today. So
Sure.
Not a big lesson other than, the adversity is short, go through it, make the hard decisions. They're never easy, but usually where you end up is stronger than where you were. And then just be careful creating basis, particularly in this environment, because the asset prices have gotten so ahead of the underlying performance of most assets that you can clearly make a mistake, where particularly if you finance yourself incorrectly.
One of the things you said very early in your conversation right there is, you talked about identity, and what I heard in a lot of the things you just said was that you are in the business of allocating funds and growing companies and working with entrepreneurs and building businesses, but also you're in the reconstruction business also. Like sometimes you have to restructure things and break things down and rebuild them, etc.
Yeah.
As you're doing that and you're very hands-on, how do you keep yourself sort of in tune with your own identity and not owning the results of everything that you do? Does that make sense? Does my question understand? And you've done this dozens and dozens of times in your career. So I've always wondered how you are able to successfully engage with a company or an entrepreneurial team and a leadership team, but also, you're a steward of that business. You have to be careful of identifying yourself with the results of those businesses. And I know I struggle with this myself, and you and I have had many conversations about this. How can entrepreneurs and leaders be better stewards of their businesses without identifying with the results of their companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. Particularly, I think stewardship is the key, at least it is for me as an investor. As an investor operator, which is kind of where we straddle because we own and control several companies on top of making minority investments, I think it always starts with the notion that the team is what gets things done. Not any individual, not the investor, not the owner. It's really, and the big lessons we've learned over the last decade plus is you can have the best idea, the best product, the best service. If you have the wrong team, you will likely fail. And if you don't fail, you'll likely underachieve what you otherwise could with that product, service, or offering. So if you recognize that as a role player in that team, you're exactly that. Whether you're the lead investor, you're the CEO, you're the CFO, you're someone that works in the warehouse, you are a collective that is moving in a direction. And, the old adage is true. It's always the journey, not the end result. And so when you end up with successes, frankly, you learn less in successes. You learn the most in failures. All my failures, I remember way too much, probably.
Right. Those are the ones that stick with you.
Yeah, they stick with you because, we're probably, as humans, probably predisposed to do that, right? Is not to make the same mistakes twice. So right. I think recognize the hard part, I think, is what you were saying, is recognizing it, that, it's the old adage again, is it's always the journey, 100%. And if you've set yourself up, and this is more personal, is if you set yourself up financially in a way that the outcome doesn't impact the other three quadrants of your life, effectively your personal life, your friendships, and your family, then that quadrant really becomes something that is more of a passion, something you can identify with, but not 100%. You can take some contribution of success, but it's always the team. And if you succeed or fail, yeah, you're always going to wear that badge. There's always everyone loves to hear the success stories, right? Because it inspires you to try. I like hearing the fail stories because it teaches you
There's some lessons
to
in
try
those.
not to do the next time. Exactly. And the failures are always the lessons. That you can ask any successful person, everyone remembers the mistakes that they would have made or they did make at that point in time. The other thing I try to contextualize is decision-making at points in time. So failures sometimes are the result of consecutive bad decisions. If you look back at the time that you make a decision that changed the direction one way or another, and if you look back in hindsight, true hindsight, and say, given the facts, I probably would have made the exact same decision, but the outcome wasn't successful. You can clearly allow yourself a disconnect, being that actually wasn't a mistake. Did I make the wrong decisions? Maybe not, right? Even looking in hindsight, I made the best decision I could with the facts that I had at that point in time, but the result wasn't what we all hoped or expected. And so that's how I take some solace in some failures. The other component is, and I fundamentally believe this, almost any endeavor, particularly entrepreneurial endeavors, is 50% a combination of luck and timing. And if people don't recognize that, I think you're giving too much credit to anything, to the team, to the product, to the service, to your own ambitions. Oftentimes, there's no real way to predict outcomes. And you'll see some examples. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs try things that had you had a full picture of the environment in which they're stepping into, they never would try it, because the analytics would tell you
there's no opportunity here.
Yeah. And sometimes what happens is the market moves from where the analytics were telling you that there's no opportunity, or, people underestimate execution. That's the other component of success, I think, is underestimated, is you can have a very similar product, very similar service, very, very similar target, and 6 other people trying the same thing. But if you can out execute, you will generally win. And there's usually room for more than one winner. So the value that I try to put in those situations is, let's make sure with what resources we have, we don't underperform on execution, because that's controllable. What's uncontrollable are the variables that are uncontrollable: marketplace, technology a little bit,
right.
Stuff like that.
I love that perspective. And actually, for me, even, it's a really good reminder about focusing on team and taking all the individual parties and all the egos out of the equation, because I think that's where most companies get tripped up. We attach ourselves to our identity, our role, our contribution, what we think we can add. But really, if a healthy business doesn't have a healthy team that's all working together, rowing the same boat, like, people are going to be rowing different directions. That was a really healthy reminder just for me today. So that's awesome. So let's see, what else do I want to talk to you about? One of the things that I love about you is you always keep yourself above it all. And I've never really seen you, and I don't work with you personally, right? But like, I've seen the way that you're able to manage your routines, manage your health, manage your mindset as you go through incredibly difficult and challenging things in your career. And I also love how you said, like, how you compartmentalize different parts of your life so that, you have that balance. But like, how do you do that? What are some of the things that you've learned in your daily routines or your habits, right, that allow you to stay grounded and clear and focused and with energy? And I know you're a really active guy, so talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for a lot of the credit. So definitely get stressed. So that
I'm sure you get stressed.
That part that you see is not fully fully available to you. And you can ask my coworkers for that, for sure. But I think the part that, at least in the last sort of 5-7 years, was that compartmentalization of components of your life that you really care about, and then recognizing that this is just a component, even though probably in my younger years it was the component. And I think as I got a little older, some of the variables that I talked about that are uncontrollable, are truly uncontrollable. So
Right.
if you recognize that, I think you can manage your mental health in a way that even in adverse situations that potentially impact the other three quadrants, you just kind of get into, I've been here before the thing. I think that's the other component that I rely on is, coming basically, as immigrants, we all are basically from zero. How bad can it get, right? Ultimately, if you have your
What's the worst that could happen? I can go back to the village.
yeah, yeah. Ultimately, we all can go back, right? And we're all smart enough to try something new, and most of us have put ourselves in a situation where, so only certain things I really, really miss, right? Like good food or maybe a nice vacation here or there. But other than that, I really don't. Funnily enough, I was just before I got on this call buying insurance for. I just got engaged, so I was like, okay, let me buy some personal insurance. Probably the most expensive thing I've ever bought, right? And I was like, okay. And I was talking to an insurance lady. I was like, what do I need to insure? And I was like, I don't have anything. I don't have anything I need to insure because there's nothing of value that I actually even. And I think one of the philosophies I've tried to live by is this notion of not being attached, to material things at all.
And you embody that well. I will admit that.
Yeah, and I think that's key a little bit to at least my own happiness is can't spend time on that. It has to be experiences, time with family, friends. I mentioned food. I love food, so things like that drive your true happiness. And then stuff, yeah, you might have something nice and it comes and goes, great, but not really ascribe too much value to it. And then the less I think I ascribe value to that stuff, I think the happier I'll continue to be. And a few things that you might want is maybe a nice home and a nice car or a nice vacation. That's about it. After that, it's all excess. And probably the other thing I kind of realized, probably not fair, right? So I think there's clearly an obligation to get to a standard of living that you're comfortable with and then try to give back, whether that's your time, your resources, just give back because we're clearly any success is clearly the result of many people that you probably forgot have gotten you to a place where you're at. And if you can give that back and inspire, help, make the world a little bit better than where you came in, that's clearly every person's obligation, right?
One of the things that I've always wondered you're an immigrant. Were you born in the United States, by the way?
Canada.
Okay, so you were born in North America. But you're an immigrant, and we all are from India by heritage. When you grew up, did you feel a sense of needing to accomplish and needing to succeed and having that sort of programming in you? And as you grew older and as you started to find your own place in the world, like start to identify that, or because I know it's a very cultural thing for a lot of cultures, like how did you deal with that? Because you are clearly very successful, but I also want to give credit to a lot of that, right? In how you were brought up. So talk to me a little bit about how that showed up for you in your life.
Yeah, that's a good question. Clearly we try to emulate. I think we all try to emulate things that we admire. I think it was the work ethic and the sacrifice of family, parents, uncles, aunts, everybody, that you watched these people work 24/7, put me in private school, all those sacrifices that got made with very 100% freedom, right? It wasn't a tit for tat. It's a little bit unique, I think, in my life. I've seen other parents kind of help direct, which is probably a little bit better in many ways. I had only because they didn't have they didn't even know, right, how to direct because they themselves were uneducated. And one thing they did know is, that's probably the greatest path to some level of freedom and success is educating yourself. So I looked at that and then I said, I can't. And then the other selfish part was I liked the praise of doing well. I think everyone likes that. And so as a young person, you get 104 on a test. Oh, wow. Maybe can I get it 110? Can I get one? So I remember even in fourth grade, I'd get I'd go study for hours, not because I couldn't get 100. I want to get 150, right? Or whatever on the test. And so that almost reinforced your desire to
achieve
do better. Yeah, keep doing better. And then academics usually kind of set yourself up for, okay, well, career. And then that I stumbled into Wall Street a little bit. And then, from there, it just kind of looked to my left, looked to my right, and said, okay, I think I know the path that I want to get on. And then, it just happened. A lot of extremely fortuitous. I totally right place, right time, peers and others kind of inspiring the journey. So, and then fundamentally standing on the shoulders of 5'3" immigrants, right? That busted their ass in multiple countries. I mean, they have a courage and a work ethic and a sort of attachment to a set of values I don't even have. And so to try to pay respect to that, you work super hard as you can. And then you give back, right? First you give back to family and hopefully you can give back to others.
We've had a lot of really deep conversations together about, what legacy is and what you want to leave behind in all the things that you've created. And I know education is really important to you. Giving back is really important to you. Tell me about sort of what your next couple decades look like from a legacy perspective. What do you wish to accomplish from a legacy perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I recently invested in an ed tech company. I'm spending time on it, not because it's our largest investment or anything like that, but it is a sad state of affairs that I'm discovering. A little bit new too, because I was fortuitous enough, at least in high school, to go to private school, and then beyond that, it was all private school, right? So, student loans, all that stuff. So you took the risk on it, but it ultimately paid off. But when I look now backwards at kind of the state of affairs for the vast majority of the population, we are absolutely failing in a pretty dramatic way of a base level of education that's going to allow this several next generations to have a quality of life that we've enjoyed. So I would like to figure out a way to, you look at the key disruptors in technology in some of these areas, right? Right. Look what Tesla did, right, for the auto industry. Look what SpaceX did for the space industry. Look what Bezos did for, I don't think that's so remarkable, e-tailing. So, but we can talk about that some other time. But obviously took advantage of the move to the internet. But right. The education is, many people have tried I'm not saying anything new. I think most people would recognize that being educated is clearly at least one stepping stone towards having a fulfilling life. So I would love to figure out a way to, as much as I can, create opportunity, particularly for those that I think if you just gave them a little bit can
thrive,
do something with it. Yeah, much more than even I did.
I love that. And what are you working on specifically? Can you share?
Yeah. So met this entrepreneur. He's a special educator, and this is a little bit of lessons of learning for me. Is the neurodiverse learners occupy almost 10+%, sometimes up to 15% of the population. And what that means is we all have learning differences. We're all on some level of learning spectrum differences. That could be ADHD, it could be dyslexia, it could be your ability to retain information. So it's a wide range. Mm-hmm. Today, and that's not new. Everyone knows that. It also changes with age. I think one of the sad things we're seeing as a result of big tech and some of the advent of most of the social media efforts is it's actually getting much, much worse and much, much faster. Right. And so this company was developed by an entrepreneur that I met through their friend that created a way in which, and I see an analogy in healthcare actually, which I'd love to talk about at some point, of the impact of placebo. And this is it's super fascinating, where the simple act of caring has an impact on the results, and it's been proven in healthcare. We're demonstrating that exact same outcome in education, where
Sorry, go ahead.
The simple act of the connectivity between teacher and student, and then empowering the student to change their point of view of themselves, material impact on their grades. We're not teaching them how to read better, how to write better. do arithmetic better, we're trying to teach them how to become better self-directed learners, which starts with an understanding of who they are, where their strengths lie, where their interests lie, and then to drive positive habits once they've recognized that. So it's almost like a self-esteem, self-efficacy, self-empowering intervention.
Correct.
That once you've done that, you'd actually see material changes in performance, academic, sports, even just your own mental health. And so when I saw this, given how much time I spent in healthcare, it's very analogous to the reason why we do placebo-controlled trials is they found that the simple act of caring actually has an enzymatic response in patients to turn on your own immune system. So
like all the endorphins, the oxytocin levels, the cortisol, everything gets adjusted just by that human connection.
Yeah.
That's super fascinating. The act of caring.
Yeah. And so I think, there's no science underneath this, but there's an element of it, which is, and I think this is where the disconnection happens, particularly in public schools, is there is no one-on-one, interaction, very limited. So for special needs kids, it's even exacerbated even more. And so what we've done is we've created a relatively systematic approach of upskilling special education teachers. We're also incorporating teachers' assistants, which is another underutilized group of sometimes very highly qualified, but just part-time, to basically use these two resources to upskill them in a way that allows them to systematically drive outcomes that start with the student empowerment. So pretty exciting.
One of the things that's coming up for me is like, in regards to education, we are still stuck in a very industrial phase of education, industrial age of education, right? Everyone's got to learn the same thing. It's very data, memorization driven. We don't learn how to learn. And so I think that what you're talking about is, and I had an educator on the podcast a couple of weeks ago talking about this, in that, the last couple of decades, there has been a big shift to learn how to learn. And where I see that mirrored even is how we do that, kind of what you talked about, is like caring for patients or caring for students and seeing the outcome of that. Like we're seeing that in the business world in a way we've never seen that before, where they're teaching us how to be leaders, to care about the people and not the results, or like teach how to be a better person or engage with your employees in a different way. There's a whole school of thought about that as well. So I think it's really interesting to see that pattern come full circle.
And that's a great point. I think it probably works in many organizations where if you're able to empower your workforce, in this case, students, most people don't perform to their potential. That's probably one of my biggest fears is I think we all have great potential. So what a waste if we don't have the opportunity, or we don't have the tools, or we don't even realize that I'm not performing to my potential. So how do we get to most people achieving anywhere close to their potential? And if we can do that, look at the productivity gains we could have across the board in quality of life, mental health, everything.
One of the things you said to me one time, which I'll never forget, is that what would happen if, as the world is changing, we have Einstein and we have all of these geniuses in the world that have changed our world. What if there's some kid in the middle of India or Africa or Europe or somewhere that just because of access could invent something that could change the world? And we do live in an age where access allows that, right? And I think that's really powerful and really kind of serendipitous, but it's where the world is going. So it's a really exciting future.
Yeah, and I hope with improved technology, improved communications between, countries, people, that we don't miss those people, because there's a handful of people in the world that could change the direction of society, and to the extent, I'm not one of them, but maybe I can help identify that person and then support, right? And so I think if people recognize that, we would all be looking for the ability on our give back time. How do we be most impactful? And to me, that's one of the most important, is it would be such a waste if that person wasn't identified, given the right resources, motivated to go do what would potentially be a remarkable outcome for all of us.
I want to close on that. I really appreciate you doing this with me, sharing, and really honor you for all the hard work you do, but also just your perspective on how you lead future generations and how you're trying to change the world in your own little way. So I appreciate that. I guess I have one last question.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be rich?
I think it means to be content and to go to bed knowing you tried your hardest at what you do and what you love, and you're tired at the end of the day when you go to bed doing exactly that. I think that's living rich.
I love that. All right, G. Well, I don't know if everyone knows this, but we can make a public announcement today. So congratulations on your engagement to your beautiful to-be bride. And, just super happy for you. And thanks for sharing all your knowledge. And if people want to get a hold of you or reach out to you, how can they get in touch?
Probably email is best. I'm off social media for the most part. So I'm happy to share, or you can share if you'd like, my Gmail account. So it's gjpatel9@gmail.com.
And we'll put it in the link. But thanks so much, G, and appreciate your time, brother.